Chapter 17. Sunday morning. Kurt Olson pulls the trigger. Kurt Olson moseyed through the tailgate crowd at Oxford, Mississippi, where in just a little over 2 hours the Mississippi Christmas Elves would host the Arkansas Presidents in a battle for Port-au-Sale Western Conference supremacy. The Elves played 5 games at Oxford and 4 in Starkville in odd years and vice versa in even years. For all the squawking about the Southern Football League wounding the college game, Ole Miss and the Bulldogs had both strengthened their programs through national exposure and a deluged revenue stream. Crocodile tears en route to the lending institution. Having parked in a church lot 2 miles away, Kurt Olson now wandered the vast frying pan parking lot of Vaught Hemingway Stadium. He had tracked Eva Marie Taffy on a webcast earlier today as she exited the new Baptist church. The religious ceremony was moved ahead 2 hours so that the most famous member of the congregation could be photographed at the Mississippi Christmas Elves tailgate party. Kurt Olson circled the bustling stadium lot, and as he was about to complete a full lap, he spied Eva Marie Taffy on the front side of the arena. Actually, he spotted the 6'6" state trooper who was working a security detail for the Taffy campaign. His oversized frame, topped off with his smoky the bear hat, and the mob surrounding him, made Eva Marie Taffy's entourage hard to miss. Kurt Olson recalled his final conversation with Leo Kelly yesterday as Agent Olson rested on his unmade bed at the Sawmill Lodge. Leo had dropped his guard and talked to his subordinate as if he were his son. He reminded Kurt Olson of his crimes and reminded him that Leo had stuck his neck out for him. He reminded him that he had painted himself into a corner. If he went to prison as a disgraced cop, he would die friendless. If he did what needed to be done, he would forever be remembered as a folk hero. The pressured cop who finally snapped. He loved his law enforcement brothers and sisters, and he would prove his love by eliminating a smart-ass politician who planned to turn loose half of our state's prison population. It's up to you, Kurt. It's up to you. Kurt Olson could not remember Leo addressing him by his first name before. He got all choked up at the conclusion of the pep talk. He had let down his tribe before. Today, he would not disappoint. Winding his way through customized SUVs and workforce pickups, Kurt Olson took in the husky smell of Franks and burgers, and he breathed the warm air of camaraderie. His father had never been interested in spectacles of any kind. No games, no races, no concerts, no Branson, no Vegas. Owen had never shown an interest in such things either. They liked to hunt and fish and build things, and Kurt Olson appreciated those qualities in his mentors. But this morning, Kurt Olson felt like he missed out on something. The fraternity, the fellowship. 20 feet away, he saw an old guy in a snowman suit drinking beer with a young Santa Claus. There were Santa Clauses everywhere you turned, and all those beautiful women in those skimpy elf costumes. None of it made any sense to Kurt Olson, but he knew he could learn to love this scene. Kurt Olson studied the Eva Marie Taffy retinue from a distance of 50 feet. The cortege, a tall state trooper, her campaign manager in rumpled suit, his shapely brunette assistant, a couple of cameramen, and a couple of other production guys, all done up in T-shirts and denim, had wandered into a friendly mob of elf diehards. A green elf with pronounced cleavage stood in the bed of a red Dodge truck and sung a bawdy version of Frosty the Snowman that poked fun at the Arkansas president's head coach. Taffy would place her hand over her mouth with an exaggerated motion, and she giggled and thanked the buxom elf for her performance. Kurt Olson reminded himself of why he was here. He planned to walk past that skyscraper of a trooper, put a couple of slugs into Eva Marie Taffy's heart, and maybe give her one to the crown after she hit the asphalt. Under no circumstances would he raise his weapon to the trooper. He was doing this for him and people like him. Kurt Olson was standing amongst a half-dozen middle-aged coffee and donut guys when the trooper's sunglasses aimed directly at him from a distance of about 40 feet. Kurt Olson pretended to be a member of the Sober for Life Brigade who sat in lawn chairs at the tail of a blue Honda SUV. Jingle bell, jingle bell, jingle bell rock. Build up the lead and run out the clock. The Hawaiian shirt Santas relieved Kurt Olson of the lead vocals just in time, and the other 5 men raised their voices to the heavens to prove once more that they did not need beer or Jack Daniels to revel, and yes, they were having just as much fun as anyone. Kurt Olson had committed a minor faux pas, but it did not matter with this group. He was only vaguely familiar with the elaborate Christmas elf rituals that had developed in less than 5 years. Jingle Bell Rock was only sung in the fourth quarter when the mighty elves held a lead and were running out the clock with short passes and a dominant ground game. Kurt Olson had done some research, and he knew that Jingle Bells was the official fight song, and that White Christmas was piped through stadia speakers after victories, and Silent Night was played after those rare home losses. But at any rate, Jingle Bell Rock seemed to divert the troopers' attention, and as Eva Marie Taffy walked by, Kurt Olson followed her as unobtrusively as possible. Eva Marie Taffy sauntered down a parking row that ran roughly parallel to the 40-yard line. Kurt Olson followed her from an adjacent row about 3 cars behind her. He liked to slouch behind mammoth pickups and Titanic SUVs and study her movements unnoticed, ever mindful of the trooper's predatory gaze. Kurt Olson had learned that Christmas elf fans use Christmas carols as football filk. Each week they would rewrite the lyrics to lambast their next opponent. Planted next to a sparkle gold Toyota SUV, Kurt Olson picked out 2 filk songs about Chauncey Phillips, the recently injured Arkansas running back. In an adjacent row in the opposite direction of Taffy, roughly parallel to the 20-yard line, a man in a flannel shirt and Santa hat stroked his portable keyboards. In an almost professional delivery, he belted out his parody. Chauncey the Snowman is a very injured troll, with a tibia that snaps like twigs into crutches made of gold. At precisely the same time, a dozen man-elves and she-elves broke into a cappella at the end of the row where Kurt Olson now huddled. Chauncey, the gimp-legged president, had a brittle set of bones, and if you ever broke one, you would even say he moans. With the sun getting warmer, the skies getting bluer, the air getting crisper, and goosebumps on elves' legs getting ever goosier, and the lusty aroma of broiled beef masking every other sensation, Kurt Olson took a minute to savor life as he would never know it again. It was time to cross the Rubicon. It was time to pull the trigger. As calmly as a man rolling out of bed, Kurt Olson squeezed past a jersey-wearing, beer-drinking elderly woman with a meek, "Excuse me." Eva Marie Taffy was 40 feet in front of him. She walked at a carnival midway pace. Kurt Olson stroked the weapon he held in his blazer pocket. He would catch up to her and then... But wait. Looking past Eva Marie Taffy, Kurt Olson spotted something that gave him the chills. 20 feet past Eva Marie Taffy, a man in a number 9 Christmas elf jersey stood a familiar character. It was one of the village people, the construction worker in Biloxi and Vicksburg. The guy in black coveralls who planted the homemade bomb on Taffy's car. What was he doing here? Kurt Olson froze for a second and returned to the row of parked cars on his left. Dipping between a red and green Ford truck and a green and red GMC truck, he found himself face to face with a second member of the village people, dressed in a Santa suit and a white beard that covered most of his face. The senior village person whom he had nicknamed Coach had almost run into him. Kurt Olson did not know that this man was named Ivan Guzman. Mr. Guzman did not make eye contact. He turned in reverse direction and then proceeded to squeeze between the next available space and re-emerged in the lane where Eva Marie Taffy had now stopped to mingle. Kurt Olson assessed the situation. The village people. Now they made sense. They were going to Jerome Johnson him. Jerome Johnson had shot Joseph Colombo, and a second gunman jumped out of the shadows and shot Johnson and was never apprehended. They planned to do that to Kurt Olson. It was the plan all along. How had he missed it? Kurt Olson shivered. He would be remembered as a crooked Fed, and his family would be disgraced. His throat was dry, and he could feel the streams of sweat run down his back. Suddenly, a stray drum beat emanated from the stadium, and fanish hoops and rebel hollers filled the parking lot. The roar exploded with the second drum beat. Every soul, as far as the eye could see, secured sandwich and beverage and terminated calls and scrambled to face the stadium flag. A third drum beat was accompanied by a gentle guitar. Kurt Olson knew that song. Eve of Destruction had started out as a joke. A forgotten comedian had quipped, "I'm not saying our football team was bad, but our high school fight song was Eve of Destruction." The rabid elf fans would sing it over and over before the start of a game with a mismatched opponent. Besides the Star-Spangled Banner, it was the only non-Christmas music to be heard at an Elves home game. Somehow, the taunt had morphed into an anthem that confused outsiders and would probably confuse the faithful, should they ever reflect on such matters. The original lyrics were dated, but they could bring grown men to tears. It's a Mississippi thing. You wouldn't understand. The song was played by stadium officials at exactly 3 hours, 2 hours, and 1 hour before the start of the game. As Eva Marie Taffy maneuvered for perfect angle, one that would capture her diminutive frame with what looked to be all of her sovereign state behind her, the techies framed her with their backs to Hollingsworth Field. She would look past the lens to that part of heaven enshrined by Mississippi and let the citizenry know that she knew every lyric and every left-handed symbol, the perfect composition that would later earn an award for her still photographer. Kurt Olson was possibly the only person unfrozen. As the costume herd stood at attention, he casually walked the row of cars and emerged in Taffy's lane between a black Mercedes coupe and an Audi sedan. From this point, the stadium was perhaps 200 feet in front of him. Ivan Guzman was about 20 feet in front of him. He, too, stood with his hand over his heart and sang in tune with the other voices. The trooper was about 10 feet in front of Ivan Guzman. Like the camera crew and media photographers, he kept his eyes on Taffy. Eva Marie Taffy's troop was now 30 feet behind Kurt Olson. Kurt Olson glanced in her direction and beyond. Every tailgater now stood and sang in unison. Yeah, my blood's so mad, feels like coagulating. I'm sitting here just contemplating. I can't twist the truth. It knows no regulation. Kurt Olson remembered something his father had told him. Never move south of Virginia. The sun makes people psychotic. Hostile religions always spawn in hot environments. The hotter the sun, the more vicious the people. Drugs became popular after people got air conditioning so that they could be as stupid and as crazy and as mean as they were in the old days when the sun fried their brains like eggs on summer asphalt. Never move south of Virginia. And Kurt Olson shifted his attention to Eva Marie Taffy. She seemed so sincere when she sang those words. Handful of senators don't pass legislation, and marches alone can't bring integration. When human respect is disintegrating, the whole crazy world is just too frustrating. This crazy world is indeed too frustrating, Kurt Olson observed. People like Eva Marie Taffy singing about integration as she's about to become governor of her state. Why do these brain-cooked Southerners embrace this song? Think of all the hate there is in Red China. Then take a look around to Selma, Alabama, and the entire congregation pointed in the general direction of Alabama. What right do these idiots have to point to Alabama? Alabama had been Negro paradise compared to Mississippi. You may leave here for 4 days in space. Everyone, including Ivan Guzman, lifted 4 fingers into the smoky air. Kurt Olson observed the trooper was marching back towards Eva Marie Taffy. Then he noticed Guzman. He had turned away from the flag and now looked in Taffy's direction. The right hand that had covered his heart now crept into his red and green blazer. With wide eyes, he stepped towards Taffy and her entourage. Guzman rushed past Kurt Olson, oblivious to his presence. Kurt Olson tracked his movements and... No! He was headed toward the tall trooper who had his back to Olson and Guzman. No! 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 You can bury your dead, but don't leave a trace. Pop! Blood streamed down the back of the trooper's head, and for Kurt Olson, everything was in slow motion. He removed his weapon from his pocket and aimed it at Guzman. Pop! A second shot hit the trooper's head before he fell. Kurt Olson responded with an immediate pow that shattered Guzman's skull like a November pumpkin, spraying its rotted contents and completing a Christmas motif on the body of a green and gold SUV. Pop, pop, pop. Unbeknownst to Kurt Olson, the younger village person, a man named Miguel Uribe had shot Eva Marie Taffy in the chest and then shot her again as she rolled on the asphalt. Unbeknownst to all except Eva Marie Taffy, she wore a Kevlar vest underneath her flame red dress. The impact would crack ribs, and each hit would feel like she had been slugged by a blacksmith swinging a ball-peen hammer. But she was not mortally wounded. More gunshots rang out. People scattered, but they clogged the area between Kurt Olson and Eva Marie Taffy. To get a better perspective, Kurt Olson darted back between the Audi and the Benz. He dashed 3 car lengths and ducked into a narrow canyon formed by a small red Toyota pickup and a massive elevated blue swamp truck. In his years as a sheriff's deputy, Kurt Olson faced 2 or 3 chaotic episodes every year. Situations that were unique and too unpredictable to rehearse. He had seen senior officers freeze, but Kurt Olson always knew what to do. Everything would go slow-mo, and he would do the right thing every time. A lesser man might not have made sense of a frenzied Eva Marie Taffy racing in his direction just a car length in front of him. But most men could not make sense of the pop-pop that came from the diminutive shooter who could almost touch his prey. But Kurt Olson assessed the situation instantly. Had Miguel Uribe fired into Taffy's skull, he might have altered the course of history. But instead, he fired into her Kevlar-plated trunk, and Eva Marie Taffy would survive the attack. She dove face first to the asphalt, and in a graceful roll, she whirled herself under the elevated swamp truck with its 3-foot clearance. With Taffy out of the way, Kurt Olson stood in a two-hand stance, less than 10 feet from her pursuer. Both men fired. Kurt Olson landed a fatal shot to the heart. His foe planted a slug on the right side of his killer's torso. Kurt Olson struggled to remain conscious as his lung filled with blood. He heard screaming and chatter, and then silence. A long, cold silence. An hour later, he awoke on an emergency room table and had to be calmed down. A doctor in blood-soaked scrubs told him he was going to live. The doctor was right.